Some traditions are not just rules written in old books. They are promises made to the dead, kept alive by the living. And in the kingdom of Valdenmark, there was one promise that had never been broken in 300 years. For as long as anyone could remember, the coronation anniversary belonged to one person alone, the reigning monarch's late mother, Queen Aurelia, the woman who had rebuilt Valdenmark from ashes after the Great Flood. On that single day each spring, no living royal wore a crown, no new titles were announced, no celebrations of the present were allowed to overshadow the memory of the woman who had given everything so the kingdom could survive. It was a day of silence, of white flowers, of one candle burning in the great hall from dawn until dark. Princess Aurelia had stood beside that candle every year since she was 6 years old. She was the only one left who still remembered her grandmother's voice. So when a quiet letter arrived at her chambers one gray morning, a letter informing her that this year the rules would change, that the day would now include a grand ceremony welcoming Lady Sabine into the royal fold, Aurelia set down her tea very slowly and read the words 3 times to be sure she had not imagined them. Her brother, the king, wanted to give away the one day that was never his to give. And what happened over the next 3 weeks would test a family, shake a throne, and force a young woman to decide how much she was willing to lose to keep a promise no one else seemed to remember. This is the story of the princess who would not move. Princess Aurelia of Valdenmark had always woken before the sun. It was a habit her grandmother had given her, long ago, when the old queen would take her small hand and lead her through the cold stone corridors to watch the light come up over the eastern hills. The kingdom belongs to whoever loves it first each morning, Queen Aurelia used to say. Aurelia had never forgotten those words, and even now, at 26, she rose in the dark and dressed by candlelight while the rest of the palace still slept. On the morning the letter came, she had already been awake for 2 hours. She sat by the tall window of her chambers, a cup of tea cooling on the sill beside her, watching the gray mist roll off the river that curved around the base of the castle. It was early spring, the season of thin light and bare trees, the season when Valdenmark always turned quiet and thoughtful. The coronation anniversary was only 3 weeks away. A soft knock came at her door. It was Berta, the old woman who had served Aurelia's family for 40 years, her back bent now but her eyes still sharp. She carried a small silver tray, and on it lay a single folded letter sealed with the royal crest. "From the king's office, my lady," Berta said. "The messenger said it was not urgent, but that you should read it before the council meets." Aurelia thanked her and took the letter. She did not open it right away. There was something in Berta's face, a small tightness around the mouth, that made her pause. Berta had a way of knowing things before anyone spoke them aloud, but the old woman only bowed and slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. Aurelia broke the seal. The letter was written in the neat, careful hand of Lord Merrick, the king's chief adviser. It was polite. It was full of soft words and gentle phrases, and it took her 3 readings to understand what it was actually saying underneath all that softness. This year, the letter explained, His Majesty King Cassian wished to bring new life and new joy to the kingdom. After much thought, the king had decided that the coronation anniversary would be the perfect occasion for a very special announcement. On that day in the great hall, before the assembled lords and ladies of Valdenmark, the king would formally welcome Lady Sabine of the Western Reach into the royal family. There would be a ceremony. There would be music. There would be a feast. The old customs of the day, the letter said, while beautiful, had grown perhaps a little heavy with sorrow, and it was time for the kingdom to look forward rather than back. Aurelia read that last line a 4th time, a little heavy with sorrow. She set the letter down on the sill next to her cold tea, and for a long moment she simply looked out the window at the mist. Her hands were very still in her lap, but inside her chest something had gone cold and tight. She knew what the coronation anniversary was. She knew it the way she knew her own name. 300 years ago, When the great flood had swallowed half the kingdom and killed thousands, it had been Queen Aurelia, Aurelia's own grandmother, the last in a long line to carry that name, who had refused to flee. While other rulers had run for the high country with their gold and their guards, Aurelia had stayed in the drowning capital. She had opened the royal granaries to the starving. She had waded through the flood herself to pull children from the water. She had given away the crown jewels, one by one, to buy grain from foreign ships, until there was nothing left of the royal treasure but the plain iron circlet she wore on her own head. And when the waters finally went down and the kingdom began to breathe again, the people had wanted to build her statues, to name cities after her, to shower her with the very wealth she had given away. Aurelia had refused all of it. She had asked for only one thing. One day each year, she said, should be set aside, not to celebrate her, but to remember the promise she had made to the dead, that Valdenmark would never again let its rulers place their own comfort above the lives of its people. That day became the coronation anniversary, and the custom was simple and strict. On that one day, no living royal wore a crown, no titles were given, no new person was raised up or celebrated. The great hall stood nearly empty, lit by a single candle, and the royal family sat in silence among white flowers and remembered the cost of the throne they sat upon. It was not a sad day exactly. It was a serious one. It was the soul of the kingdom, kept in a small, quiet flame. For 300 years, through good kings and weak ones, through war and peace and plenty and want, that custom had never once been broken. And now her brother wanted to fill that day with music and feasting, to welcome a woman he had known for less than a year. Aurelia stood up. She dressed carefully, choosing a plain gray gown without jewels, and she went to find the king. She found Cassian in the eastern solar, the bright round room where he liked to take his breakfast. He was 3 years older than her, tall and easy in his movements, with the same dark hair their mother had passed to both of them. He had been king for 4 years now since their father died, and Aurelia loved him. That was the thing she reminded herself of, standing in the doorway. Whatever came next, she loved her brother. He looked up when she entered and smiled at her. "Aurelia, you're up early." "Well, of course you are. You're always up early. Sit. Have you eaten?" "I read the letter," she said. Something in her voice made his smile falter just slightly. He set down his knife. "Ah," he said. "Merrick sent it then. I told him to. I thought it would be gentler than hearing it from me across a council table." "Gentler," she repeated. She stayed standing. "Cassian, you cannot do this." He sighed, the sigh of a man who had expected this conversation and hoped to have it later. "Sit down, Aurelia, please. Let me explain what I'm actually thinking before you decide I've become a monster." She sat because she loved him, and because she wanted, badly wanted, to hear an explanation that would make sense of this. "The kingdom is heavy," Cassian said, leaning forward, his hands open on the table. "Have you not felt it? Everywhere I go, people speak in low voices about the old days, about hard times, about what was lost. We are a kingdom that lives in its own shadow. Grandmother's memory is beautiful, but it has become a weight. The coronation anniversary is the heaviest day of all. Children dread it. It is a day of ghosts. I want, just once, to make it a day of hope. To show the people that Valdenmark can look forward, that we can build something new. Sabine is part of that new future. What better day to show the kingdom that light can come even into our darkest, most solemn hours?" Aurelia listened to all of it, and she understood, she truly did, that her brother believed what he was saying. That was almost the worst part. "Cassian," she said quietly, "do you know why grandmother chose that day to be silent? Not a day of statues, not a day of feasting in her honor. Silence." "Because she was humble," he said. "Because she was afraid," Aurelia said. "Not of dying. She told me this herself near the end when I was small and she thought I was too young to remember. She was afraid of what thrones do to the people who sit on them. She had seen it. She had watched rulers she once admired become soft and selfish, watched them start to believe that the kingdom existed to serve them, rather than the other way around. She made that day of silence not to be remembered as a hero. She hated being called a hero, but as a warning, a rope tied around the wrist of every future king and queen. One day a year when the crown comes off and the ruler has to sit in the dark and remember that they are servants, not masters. That the moment we start using the people's sacred days for our own celebrations is the moment we have already begun to fall. The solar was very quiet. Somewhere outside a bird was singing. And you would take that day, Aurelia went on, her voice steady even though her hands were not. The one rope tied around your wrist, the one day meant to keep you humble, and you would use it to throw a feast, to announce a new lady, to celebrate yourself and your future. Cassian, do you not see? You are doing the exact thing the day exists to prevent. You are the warning. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something flicker in his face. Doubt. The boy he had once been, who had knelt beside her at the candle every year. But then the door opened, and Lady Sabine came in. Sabine was beautiful in the way that made rooms go quiet. She was perhaps 30, poised and graceful, dressed in deep blue silk that must have cost more than a farmer earned in 5 years. She smiled warmly at Aurelia, and there was nothing cruel in the smile, nothing openly false. That, too, made things harder. It would have been easier if Sabine had been a villain. "Princess Aurelia," Sabine said, dipping into a graceful bow. "I hope I'm not interrupting. Cassian, my love, the tailors are asking about the colors for the ceremony, and I told them I wouldn't dream of choosing without asking whether the royal family had preferences." "You should not be planning a ceremony at all," Aurelia said, more sharply than she intended. "Not for that day." Sabine's smile did not fall, but it cooled. "Cassian explained the tradition to me," she said gently, "and I think it's lovely, truly. But he also explained that traditions are made by people and people can choose to let them grow. I would never wish to disrespect your grandmother's memory. I only hope to add to it. Is that so wrong to want to bring a little joy?" It was well said. It was even kindly said. And Aurelia understood in that moment that this was going to be much harder than a simple argument between a brother and sister. Sabine was not stupid. She had already made herself the reasonable one, the gentle one, the one who only wanted joy. Which made Aurelia, by contrast, the cold one, the one clinging to old sorrows, the one standing in the way of hope. "It is not about joy," Aurelia said, rising to her feet. "It has never been about joy or sorrow. It is about a promise. And a promise you break because it has grown inconvenient was never a promise at all." She looked at her brother. "Cassian, I am asking you as your sister, not as anything else. Do not do this. Choose any other day of the year. I will dance at your feast. I will welcome Lady Sabine with an open heart. I will pour the wine myself, but not on that day. Any day but that one." Cassian looked at her, and she saw the struggle in him, and for a heartbeat she thought she had won. Then Sabine placed her hand very lightly on the king's shoulder. She said nothing. She only stood there, gentle and patient and lovely, and let her presence do the work. "The plans are already in motion, Aurelia," Cassian said at last, and his voice had changed. It had gone formal. It had gone kingly. "The invitations have been sent. Half the noble houses of the Western Reach are already traveling. To cancel now would be an insult to Sabine's family and a sign of weakness to the whole court. I have made my decision. I had hoped, I still hope, that you will stand beside me on that day as my sister and share in the kingdom's new beginning." The words landed in Aurelia's chest like stones. "And if I will not?" she asked quietly. Something hardened in his eyes. "Then you will be standing against your king," he said, "in front of the entire court. Think very carefully, sister, about what that means." The room was silent. Sabine's hand rested on his shoulder. The bird outside had stopped singing. Aurelia looked at her brother, this man she had loved her whole life, who had held her hand at their mother's funeral, who had taught her to ride, who had once knelt beside her at the candle with tears in his eyes, and she understood that he had already chosen. Not her, not the promise. He had chosen the easier path, the softer voice, the future that flattered him. "I have thought carefully," she said. "I have thought about it my whole life. Grandmother tied that rope around your wrist for a reason, Cassian. And if you will not feel it, then someone in this family must. She turned and walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped, though she did not look back. You asked me to think about what it means to stand against my king, she said. Now I will ask you to think about something. That candle has burned for 300 years. Every ruler before you found a way to keep it lit, even in war, even in famine, even when it would have been so much easier to let it go out. You are about to become the first. Not the first to lose a battle, not the first to make a hard choice. The first to break the one promise your own grandmother begged you to keep. When the history of Valdenmark is written, Cassian, and it will be written, that is the line they will remember about you. Not the feast, not the bride, that. And she left. She walked back through the cold stone corridors with her head high and her steps steady, past the servants who bowed and the guards who saluted. And she did not let a single tear fall until she was alone again in her chambers with the door closed behind her. Then she sat by the window, where the letter still lay beside her cold tea, and she looked out at the mist over the river, and she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. She had drawn a line. She had drawn it in front of the king. There would be no taking it back now. In 3 weeks, on the day of silence, she would either stand beside her brother and betray everything her grandmother had built, or she would stand alone against the throne in front of the entire court and pay whatever price came with that. She thought of Elira's voice, small and clear across all those years. The kingdom belongs to whoever loves it first each morning. I love it, grandmother, she whispered to the empty room. I do. But loving something, she was beginning to understand, was not the same as being able to save it. And she was only one woman, without an army, without the crown, without even the certainty that anyone else in the whole kingdom still remembered why that single candle mattered. Outside, the mist began to lift, and the pale spring sun came up over the eastern hills, exactly as it had every morning of her life. Aurelia watched it rise, and she began, quietly and alone, to think about what she would do. Because she was not going to stand beside him, that much she already knew. The only question left was how a princess with no power at all could possibly stop a king. In the days that followed, the palace filled up like a river after rain. Carriages arrived from the western reach, painted in bright colors and drawn by matched horses, carrying lords and ladies who had not troubled to visit Valdenmark in years. The guest rooms were opened and aired. The kitchens ran day and night, and the smell of roasting meat and baking bread drifted through every corridor. Musicians tuned their instruments in the great hall. Seamstresses worked until their fingers bled, stitching gowns of gold and blue. Everywhere Aurelia walked, she heard the same thing: excitement, laughter, the buzz of a court that had not had a grand occasion to enjoy in a long time. And almost no one spoke of the candle. That was what frightened her most. Not the anger, not the argument with her brother, but the silence around the thing that mattered. It was as though the whole court had quietly agreed to forget what the day was supposed to be. The young people, especially, seemed to know nothing about it. She overheard 2 lords' daughters in a corridor giggling about what a dreary custom it had always been, how glad they were the king had finally decided to do away with all that gloom. They did not even lower their voices when she passed. They did not know her face well enough to know she was listening, or perhaps they did and simply did not care. Aurelia realized, with a slow and sinking heart, that her grandmother's great fear had already half come true. The rope had loosened long before Cassian ever thought to cut it. The people had forgotten, and a promise that no one remembers is a promise already half broken. She could have given up then. It would have been easy and no one would have blamed her. She could have put on a fine gown and stood beside her brother and smiled through the feast, and the whole court would have praised her grace, and her life would have gone on comfortable and warm. The temptation was real. She felt it every time she saw the happiness on people's faces, every time she caught herself thinking, perhaps Cassian is right. Perhaps I am the one clinging to sorrow. But then she would remember Berta's tight mouth on the morning the letter came. And so, 3 days after her argument with the king, she went to find the old woman. Berta was in the small linen room near the servant's stair, folding sheets, and when Aurelia came in and closed the door, the old woman looked up as though she had been expecting her. "You knew," Aurelia said. "That morning, before I even opened the letter, you knew what was in it. How?" Berta set down the sheet she was folding. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she went to the door, checked that the corridor beyond was empty, and came back. "Because I have served this family for 40 years, my lady," she said quietly. "And I remember things the young ones do not. I remember your grandmother. I was a girl in the kitchens during the flood. I saw her wade into the water. I carried children she pulled out, wrapped them in these very kinds of sheets to warm them." Her old eyes were bright. "So when I heard the servants whispering about a feast on the day of silence, I knew grief was coming to this house, one way or another." "Then you understand," Aurelia said. "You understand why I have to stop it." Berta looked at her with something between pity and pride. "I understand why you want to, but you are one princess and he is the king, and the whole court is drunk on the idea of a party. What do you imagine you can do?" It was the same question Aurelia had been asking herself for 3 days, and she still did not have a full answer. But talking to Berta had given her the first piece of one. "You remember," Aurelia said slowly. "You saw it with your own eyes, and you cannot be the only one. There must be others, old servants, old soldiers, people who were there or whose parents were there. People who still remember what the day is actually for. Cassian says the day has become a weight, a thing of ghosts. But it is only a ghost because everyone has forgotten the living heart of it. What if they remembered? What if the people who were saved, or their children, or their grandchildren, stood up and said, 'No, this day is ours and it means something'?" Berta was quiet. "You want to fight the king," she said, "not with an army but with memory." "I have no army," Aurelia said simply. "Memory is all I have." The old woman studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "There is a woman in the lower town," she said. "Old Hannah, older than me if you can believe it. Her whole family drowned in the flood save herself, and your grandmother took her in, gave her work, gave her a life. She still lights her own candle every year in her window on the day. There are others like her, not many, but some. If you want to find the people who remember, start with Hannah. She will know the rest." And so Aurelia began. She could not go openly, of course. A princess walking through the lower town asking questions would draw every eye and reach the king's ears within the hour. So she went the way her grandmother once had, quietly, in a plain cloak, with the hood up, in the gray hours of early morning before the court was awake. Berta showed her the servants' passages that ran through the belly of the castle and out through a small door by the river, and from there Aurelia walked into the waking city like any ordinary woman. She found old Hannah in a tiny house that leaned against the old sea wall, its window facing the water. The woman was nearly blind now, her hands twisted with age, but when Aurelia knocked and spoke her name, not her title, only her name, Hannah went very still. "Elira's blood," the old woman breathed. "I would know that voice anywhere. She spoke just so. 'Come in, child, come in out of the cold.'" They sat together in the small, warm room, and Aurelia told her everything. The letter, the feast, the king's decision to fill the day of silence with music and celebration. And as she spoke, she watched the old woman's clouded eyes fill slowly with tears, not weak tears, but hard ones, the kind that come from somewhere deep and old. "So he would put out the candle," Hannah said when Aurelia had finished. "The one your grandmother lit with her own hands to remember my mother and my brothers and all the others the water took. He would put it out for a party." "He does not understand what he is doing," Aurelia said. "He thinks he is bringing hope. He does not remember. None of them remember." "I remember," Hannah said fiercely. "I remember every year, and I am not the only one." She reached out with her twisted hand and gripped Aurelia's wrist with surprising strength. "You want us to speak, child. That is why you have come. You want the ones who remember to lift up their voices." I do not know if it will change anything, Aurelia admitted. The king has made his decision, but I cannot let the day die in silence, the wrong kind of silence, with no one saying what it means. If it must be broken, then at least let it be broken loudly. Let everyone hear what is being lost. Hannah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There is a book." Aurelia went still. "A book?" "Your grandmother kept a record," Hannah said. "In the years after the flood, every family the water took, every child she pulled out, every promise she made. She wrote it all down in her own hand, and she read from it on the first day of silence, the very first coronation anniversary, before there was any custom at all. I was there. I heard her read the names of my mother and my brothers aloud, and I heard her weep as she read them. That book was the true beginning of the day, not the candle." "The names. Where is it?" Aurelia whispered. "It was kept in the royal library," Hannah said. "In the deep archive where they put the things too painful to look at often. Whether it is still there after all these years I cannot say. But if it is, child, if you could find it and read those names aloud in the great hall before the whole court on that day." The old woman's grip tightened. "Then let them try to feast over the sound of the dead being named. Let them try." Aurelia sat in the small, warm room by the sea wall, and something in her chest that had been cold and tight since the morning of the letter began, at last, to burn. She had a plan now, not a certain one, not a safe one, but a real one. She went back to the palace the way she had come, through the river door and the servants' passages, and that same night, when the court was at supper and the corridors were empty, she went down into the deep archive of the royal library. It was a vast, cold, forgotten place, far below the bright halls where the court laughed and danced, a warren of stone shelves stretching into the dark, thick with dust and the smell of old paper. Aurelia carried a single lamp, and its small light seemed to be swallowed almost at once by the darkness. She searched for hours. She read the faded labels on box after box, drawer after drawer, her fingers growing black with dust and her back aching. Records of harvests, records of taxes, old maps, old letters, the dead paperwork of 300 years. And then, near dawn, in a plain wooden box on a low shelf in the deepest corner, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, she found it. It was a heavy book, bound in worn leather, the pages soft and yellow with age. And on the first page, in a strong, slanting hand she had seen only a few times in her life, on old letters her grandmother had left her, were written the words, "To remember is the only crown worth wearing, Aurelia." Aurelia sank down onto the cold stone floor with the book in her lap, and she wept. She had not wept like this even on the morning of the letter. She wept for her grandmother, and for Hannah's drowned family, and for the day that was dying, and for her brother who had forgotten. And when she was done weeping, she wiped her eyes and opened the book and began to read. Page after page of names, whole families, children as young as 2 years old. Beside each name, in her grandmother's hand, a small note, "Loved music," had a gap in her teeth, always first to laugh, would have been a great baker. Aurelia had not simply recorded the dead. She had refused to let them be only numbers. She had held on to who they were. And Aurelia understood then the true genius of the day her grandmother had made. It had never been about grief for its own sake, the way Cassian believed. It had been about refusing to let people become forgettable, about a ruler who insisted once a year on remembering that every person in the kingdom was a whole world, precious beyond any crown. That was the promise. That was the rope. Never forget that they are real. Never let yourself grow so comfortable that they become small to you. She sat in the cold archive as the pale light of dawn crept down through the high dusty windows, and she made her decision fully and finally. On the day of silence, she would not stand beside her brother, and she would not stay away. She would walk into the great hall in the middle of his feast, and she would open this book, and she would read the names of the dead aloud until either they threw her out or the court fell silent and remembered. It would cost her everything. She knew that. To interrupt the king, to shame him before the nobles of the Western Reach, before Sabine's family, before the whole court, he had told her himself what it would mean. She would be standing against her king in front of everyone. He might strip her titles. He might send her away. She might lose her brother forever. But some things, she was learning, were worth more than comfort and worth more even than love, if love asked you to help it forget. She wrapped the book back in its oilcloth and carried it up out of the dark. She did not know that as she climbed the servant's stair with the book held tight against her chest, a figure stood at the top of it, half hidden in the shadow of a doorway, watching her come. It was Sabine. The lady said nothing. She simply watched Aurelia pass, her lovely face unreadable in the gray dawn light, her eyes following the shape of the book wrapped in cloth. And when the princess had gone by without seeing her, Sabine stood alone in the empty corridor for a long moment, thinking. Then she turned and went quietly to find the king. The day of silence came gray and still, the way it always did. Aurelia woke before the sun, as she always had, but this morning she did not sit by the window. She dressed in a plain dark gown without a single jewel, the way the day demanded even now, even in a palace that had forgotten why. She hid the book, wrapped in its oilcloth, beneath a fold of her cloak, and she waited. She had expected the palace to be quiet. It was not. Even at dawn she could hear it stirring, servants hurrying, musicians arriving, the great hall being dressed in gold and blue for the evening's feast. The candle was not lit in the great hall this year. She had checked in the dark before dawn. The little iron stand where it had burned for 300 years stood empty and cold. That, more than anything, hardened her resolve. But when she went to the servants' passage to make her way down unseen, she found Berta waiting for her, and the old woman's face was grave. "They know," Berta said quietly. "My lady, they know. Lady Sabine saw you come up from the archive," she told the king. "There are guards on the great hall doors now, and Lord Merrick has given orders. You are not to be admitted to the feast. If you try to enter, they are to turn you away gently," he said, but firmly. "Cassian does not want a scene. He wants you kept out." Aurelia stood very still in the dim passage. So Sabine had seen her after all. She should have felt despair. Instead, strangely, she felt calm. The last softness had gone out of the situation. There would be no quiet appeal now, no chance to change her brother's mind with words. There was only the choice, give up or find another way in. "Then I will not go in through the doors," Aurelia said. Berta looked at her. "There is no other way into the great hall, child. You know that, every entrance." "There is one," Aurelia said. "The old gallery, above the hall, where the musicians used to play in grandmother's time before they moved down to the floor. The stair to it is behind the tapestry in the north corridor. No one has used it in years. They will be watching the doors on the floor. They will not be watching the sky." Berta's old eyes widened and then slowly filled with something that was almost fierce joy. "Elira's blood," she murmured, the same words Hannah had spoken. "Go then, go, and I will make sure no one stops you. There are more of us than you think, my lady, the old servants, we remember. We will find our small ways to slow the guards, to look the wrong way, to be clumsy at the right moment. Go." And so, as the long gray day wore on toward evening and the great feast began, Aurelia climbed the narrow, forgotten stair behind the tapestry, up into the dusty dark of the old musicians' gallery, high above the hall. Below her the feast was in full glory. The great hall blazed with 1,000 candles everywhere except the one place that mattered. The long tables groaned with food. The lords and ladies of the western reach glittered in gold and blue. Music rose and swelled. And at the high table sat her brother the king, crowned and smiling, with Lady Sabine at his side in a gown like the summer sky, radiant, triumphant, lovely. Aurelia stood in the shadows of the gallery and watched, the book heavy in her hands, and for one last moment the fear rose up in her, cold and complete. Once she did this, there was no going back. She thought of her brother's face when he saw her. She thought of everything she might lose. Then the music died down, and Cassian rose to his feet and lifted his cup and began to speak. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying warm and strong through the hall. "For too long this day has been a day of shadows, Today, we change that. Today, we let light into the darkest corner of our calendar. Today, I ask you to welcome into the heart of this royal family. Marta of the River Quarter, Aurelia said. She did not shout. She had thought she would have to shout, but the hall had gone so suddenly, so completely silent at the sound of an unexpected voice from above that her words fell into it clear as a bell. 1,000 faces turned upward, searching the dark gallery. Cassian froze, his cup still raised. Aurelia stepped forward to the gallery rail, into the light, and opened the book. Marta of the River Quarter, she said again, reading from the yellowed page in her grandmother's hand. Age 9, loved to sing, was learning her letters, drowned in the flood the third night when the water took the lower town. The hall stared up at her in stunned silence. Tomas the Cooper and his wife Anna and their 3 children, Aurelia read on, her voice steady and clear. The eldest was 6. He wanted to be a soldier. They drowned together in their home, holding one another when the wall broke. Aurelia Cassian's voice was strangled. Aurelia, stop this. Guards. Old Peter the fisherman, she continued, louder now, reading faster, who went back into the water 3 times to pull out his neighbor's children and saved 4 and drowned reaching for the 5th. Little Elsa, age 2, her whole family gone. Guards, Cassian shouted, get her down from there. But the guards were slow. Somehow, in that great hall full of soldiers, the men nearest the gallery stair found themselves blocked. An old serving man had dropped a great tray of cups directly in their path, and was now on his knees apologizing profusely, gathering them with maddening slowness. And by the time they had stepped around him, the way was somehow blocked again by 2 more servants carrying a heavy bench that had gone suddenly, hopelessly crooked in a narrow doorway. Berta's small ways. The old ones remembering. And Aurelia read on. She read the names of the dead into the silent hall, one after another, her grandmother's careful notes beside each one, loved music, had a gap in her teeth, always first to laugh, would have been a great baker. And something began to happen in that room that no one had planned and no one could stop. The court fell quiet, not the enforced quiet of fear, but a deeper quiet, the kind that comes when people are made to remember something they did not know they had forgotten. An old lord near the high table lowered his head into his hand. A young woman began silently to weep. The lords and ladies of the Western Reach, who had come for a party, sat frozen and pale, listening to the names of children 300 years dead, spoken aloud in a dead queen's own words. Because you cannot feast over the sound of the dead being named. Hannah had been right, no one could. Aurelia read until her voice grew rough, and then she read on. She read the whole long roll of the drowned, every name Elira had written, and when at last she came to the final page, she stopped and looked down at her brother across the silent, candle-lit hall. These are the names, she said. This is the book. Grandmother wrote it with her own hand. And she read it aloud on the first day of silence, before there was a candle, before there was a custom, before any of us were born. This is what the day is. Not a day of ghosts, Cassian. A day of people. Real people who were loved, who mattered, who grandmother refused to let the world forget. She gave up the crown jewels to buy them grain. She waded into the water to pull out their children. And when it was over, she asked for only one thing in return. That once a year, for one single day, the ruler of Valdenmark would take off the crown and remember that these people were the reason the crown existed at all. She held up the book so the whole hall could see it. You said this day had become a weight, she said. You were right, but the weight is not sorrow, brother. The weight is responsibility. It is the weight of every life this throne is meant to protect. Grandmother tied that weight to your wrist on purpose, so that you would never forget it, so that you would never grow so comfortable in your crown that the people below you became small and forgettable. And tonight you would have cut that rope. You would have feasted on the one day meant to keep you humble. Not because you are cruel, you are not cruel. I know you are not, but because you had forgotten. Because we all had forgotten. And a promise that everyone forgets is the most dangerous thing a kingdom can lose. The hall was utterly silent now. Even the guards had stopped. "I am not standing against my king," Aurelia said, and her voice broke at last. "I never was. I am standing beside our grandmother who cannot stand for herself and beside every name in this book. That is all I have ever done. That is all this is." For a long, long moment, no one moved. Then Cassian, the king, set down his cup. He looked down at the table before him, at the gold and the glittering guests and the feast spread out on the day of silence, and when he looked up again his face had changed. The kingly hardness had gone out of it. What was left was only a man, her brother, and his eyes were wet. "Marta of the River Quarter," he said quietly, "age 9, loved to sing." His voice shook. "I remember now," he said. "God help me, I remember. She knelt with me at that candle, Aurelia, grandmother. She held my hand the same as she held yours, and she read me these names, and I wept, and I promised her." He stopped. He pressed his hand to his mouth. When he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper, but the silent hall carried it to every corner. "I promised her I would keep it lit, and I forgot. I let myself forget because forgetting was easier, because remembering asked too much of me. You were right, everything you said. I am the warning." He rose from the high table. And there, before the whole assembled court, before the nobles of the Western Reach, before Lady Sabine, the King of Valdenmark took the crown from his own head and set it down upon the table. "There will be no ceremony tonight," he said, his voice growing steadier, stronger, kingly again, but in a truer way now. "There will be no feast, take it all away. Lady Sabine," he turned to her, and there was gentleness in it, but also a new firmness, "you are welcome in this family, and I hope one day soon to welcome you properly with all the joy such a day deserves. But not on this day, never on this day. This day is not ours to give. It never was." And to his everlasting credit, Sabine, who was not a villain, who had only wanted joy and had reached for it on the wrong day, bowed her head, and after a moment said softly, "I understand. Forgive me. I did not know what I was asking you to break." Then Cassian looked up at his sister in the gallery and he said, "Aurelia, come down, bring the book, and someone," his voice caught, "someone bring a candle." She came down. The old forgotten stair was no longer blocked. The guards stood aside and bowed their heads as she passed. And in the great hall, before the whole silent court, the servants cleared away the gold and the feast, and set the plain iron candle stand back in its place, and lit the single candle that should have been burning all along. And King Cassian and Princess Aurelia knelt together beside it, brother and sister, the way they had as children, the way their grandmother had taught them. And Aurelia opened the book once more, and this time the king read with her, the two of them speaking the names of the dead aloud together into the quiet, while the candle burned and the whole court knelt in the flickering dark and remembered. Outside, the mist rolled off the river, the way it always had, and somewhere in the lower town, in a tiny house against the sea wall, an old blind woman named Hannah lit her own candle in her window, not knowing yet what had happened in the palace, only doing what she had done every year of her long life, remembering. The day of silence had been kept, as it had been kept for 300 years, as, because of one princess who would not move, it would be kept for 300 more. Some traditions are not just rules written in old books. They are promises made to the dead, kept alive by the living. And in the kingdom of Valdenmark that year, a promise that had nearly died was carried, by the smallest and most stubborn kind of courage, safely into the light of another dawn.